The dust-laden wind swept across Abigail O'Connor's face as she clutched her shivering children against her, the worn wagon creaking beneath them as they approached Downieville, California. It was 1857, and the gold rush that had drawn thousands to the Sierra Nevada foothills had already begun to wane, leaving behind a town still bustling, but with shadows of hardship growing longer each day. "Mama, I'm cold," whispered 5-year-old Thomas, his small frame trembling against her side. "I know, my love," Abigail replied, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around both him and 3-year-old Sarah. "We're almost there, just a little further." The journey from Sacramento had taken everything from her, the last of her money, her strength, and nearly her hope. After her husband Michael's death from typhoid 3 months prior, the landlord had given her 2 weeks to vacate their small home. With nowhere to go and 2 small children depending on her, Abigail had sold what little they owned to purchase passage on a wagon headed for the mining town of Downieville, where an old acquaintance had once mentioned work for washerwomen was plentiful. As the wagon rounded the bend, Downieville came into view, nestled in the valley where the Yuba River's north and south forks met. The town was larger than she expected, with wooden buildings lining the main street, their facades weathered but sturdy. Men in dusty clothes moved about with purpose, and Abigail felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps here she could rebuild their life. "This is as far as I go, madam," the driver announced, pulling the wagon to a halt at the edge of town. "You'll find the boarding house just down that way." Abigail gathered her meager belongings, a small trunk containing their clothes, a few cooking utensils, and the locket with Michael's portrait, and helped the children down from the wagon. "Thank you, sir," she said, handing him the last of her coins. The driver tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, madam." With Thomas clutching her skirt and Sarah on her hip, Abigail made her way toward the boarding house. The autumn air was crisp, and the mountains surrounding the town were beginning to show the first dusting of snow. Winter would come early here, she realized with growing dread. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sign that read, "No vacancy." Abigail's heart sank. She knocked anyway, desperation overriding propriety. A stern-faced woman opened the door, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Can I help you?" "Good afternoon, madam. I'm inquiring about a room for myself and my 2 children. We've just arrived in town." The woman's eyes softened slightly at the sight of the children, but hardened again as she shook her head. "I'm sorry, but we're full up. Mining season's ending, and we've got men coming down from the hills taking every room in town. Perhaps you know of somewhere else? I can work. I'm a good washerwoman, and I can cook and sew." "Town's full, I'm afraid. You might try Marysville or Nevada City, though they're a good day's journey from here." Abigail felt the weight of despair pressing down on her. "We have nowhere else to go," she whispered, more to herself than to the woman. The boarding house keeper hesitated. "There's a livery stable at the edge of town. The owner, Mr. Everett, sometimes lets folks stay in the hayloft in emergencies. Can't promise anything, but he's a decent sort." With a grateful nod, Abigail adjusted Sarah on her hip and took Thomas's hand. "Come along, children. We'll find a place for tonight." The livery stable was easy enough to find, the smell of hay and horses growing stronger as they approached. A large, weather-beaten structure with wide doors stood at the end of a side street, the sound of a hammer striking metal emanating from within. Taking a deep breath, Abigail stepped inside, the relative warmth a welcome relief from the chilly air outside. A man stood with his back to them, working at a forge, the muscles in his arms visible as he brought the hammer down, again and again, on a piece of glowing metal. "Excuse me, sir," Abigail called over the rhythmic clanging. The man turned, and Abigail found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sandy brown hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. A beard covered his jawline, neatly trimmed despite the soot and sweat on his face. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, setting down his hammer and wiping his hands on a nearby cloth. "Are you Mr. Everett?" Abigail asked, suddenly aware of how disheveled she and the children must look after their journey. "I am. Adam Everett, at your service." He tipped his hat slightly, his gaze taking in the children before returning to her face. "I'm Abigail O'Connor. These are my children, Thomas and Sarah. We've just arrived in town, and I'm afraid the boarding house is full. The keeper there suggested you might. That is, she said, sometimes you allow people to stay in your hayloft in emergencies. Adam studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. You've come to Downieville looking for work? Yes, sir. My husband passed 3 months ago, and we had to leave our home in Sacramento. I've heard there's work here for washerwomen. Adam ran a hand through his hair, leaving a smudge of soot on his forehead. There's work, but accommodations are scarce this time of year, miners coming down from the hills before winter sets in. I understand, but we have nowhere else to go tonight, and the children haven't eaten since morning. Abigail hated the pleading note in her voice, but pride wouldn't keep her children warm. Adam looked at the children again, his expression softening as Sarah buried her face in her mother's shoulder, and Thomas stared up at him with wide, solemn eyes. The hayloft isn't fit for a lady and her children, he said finally. I've got a small cabin behind the stable. It's nothing fancy, just a room with a bed and a stove, but it's clean and dry. I stay there sometimes when I work late, but mostly it sits empty. Relief washed over Abigail. That's very kind, Mr. Everett. I can pay not much, but something, and I could cook and clean for you in exchange. We can discuss terms tomorrow. For now, let's get you and your little ones settled. He reached for her trunk. May I? Abigail nodded, grateful for his assistance. As Adam lifted the trunk with ease, she noticed his left hand was missing 2 fingers. He caught her looking and smiled wryly. Blacksmithing can be dangerous work, he explained simply. This way? He led them through the stable, past stalls where horses nickered softly, and out a back door. A small cabin stood about 50 yards away, sheltered by pine trees. It was indeed modest, but to Abigail's weary eyes, it looked like a palace. Adam set down her trunk inside and quickly lit a fire in the small iron stove. There's a well just outside for water. Outhouse is there behind those trees. I'll bring you some food from the mercantile. Mr. Everett, your kindness is overwhelming. I don't know how to thank you. He smiled, and Abigail was struck by how it transformed his rugged face, softening the lines around his eyes. No need for thanks. I've got room and more heart than land, Mrs. O'Connor. Rest now. I'll be back shortly. After he left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, overcome with emotion. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry quiet tears of relief and gratitude that her children wouldn't be sleeping in the cold tonight. When Adam returned an hour later, he carried a basket containing bread, cheese, dried beef, apples, and a jar of milk. He had also brought a small bag of coffee and a tin of sugar. The storekeeper's wife sent along some extra things when I mentioned there were children, he explained, setting the basket on the small table. This is too much, Abigail protested weakly, even as her mouth watered at the sight of the food. Downieville folk take care of their own, Adam replied, and right now, that includes you and your children. He nodded toward the stove. There's a kettle for coffee and a frying pan in the cupboard. Make yourselves at home. I'll be in the stable if you need anything. Before Abigail could thank him again, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. As she prepared a simple meal for her children, Abigail found herself thinking about the blacksmith's kindness. In a world that had recently shown her so much cruelty, his generosity was like water in a desert. That night, with Thomas and Sarah sleeping peacefully beside her, Abigail stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of Adam's hammer as he worked late into the night. She wondered what kind of man would give up his shelter to strangers and then return to work rather than seek his own comfort. Morning came with the soft golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Abigail woke before the children and slipped outside to fetch water from the well. The air was crisp, the mountains in the distance outlined against the dawn sky. As she worked the pump, she heard the stable door open, and Adam emerged, looking as though he had been up for hours. He nodded in greeting. Good morning, Mrs. O'Connor. Did you and the children sleep well? Better than we have in weeks, Mr. Everett. I can't thank you enough. Adam, he corrected gently, no need for formalities out here. Then you must call me Abigail. He smiled, and again she was struck by how it transformed his face. Abigail, then. I've been thinking about your situation. The widow Russell runs the laundry service in town, and I know she's looking for help. I'd be happy to introduce you. That would be wonderful, thank you. Abigail hesitated. About our accommodations. Adam held up a hand. The cabin is yours for as long as you need it. We can discuss terms if you feel more comfortable with an arrangement, but there's no rush. I'd prefer that, Abigail admitted. I'm not comfortable accepting charity long term. Perhaps I could cook for you and mend your clothes. I noticed your shirt could use some attention. Adam glanced down at his patched shirt and chuckled. I'd appreciate that. Been a while since I've had a proper meal that wasn't from the hotel dining room. Later that morning, after breakfast, Adam escorted Abigail to the laundry, leaving Thomas and Sarah playing in the stable, under the watchful eye of his young assistant, a boy of about 15 named Matthew. The widow Russell was a brisk, efficient woman who sized Abigail up with a single glance. Adam says you're experienced with laundry? Yes, madam. I took in washing in Sacramento for extra money even before my husband passed. Show me your hands. Abigail extended her hands, calloused and reddened from years of work. Mrs. Russell nodded approvingly. You'll do. I pay 50 cents per day, 6 days a week. Hours are long, sunrise to sunset. Can your children stay elsewhere while you work? Abigail glanced at Adam uncertainly. Matthew can watch them during the day, Adam interjected. He's good with children, and they can stay in the stable office where it's warm. Mrs. Russell raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. You can start tomorrow. Be here at dawn. As they walked back to the stable, Abigail's mind whirled with possibilities. 50 cents a day was good wages enough to save for their own place eventually. Adam, are you sure about Matthew watching the children? I wouldn't want to impose. Matthew lost his parents in a mining accident last year. He's been living in the stable loft and working for me since then. I think he'd enjoy the company, and it would give him some responsibility. Besides, I'll be right there most of the time. Abigail was learning that Adam Everett was a man of few words, but deep compassion. His kindness extended not just to her family, but to the orphaned boy as well. You're a good man, Adam Everett, she said softly. He looked away, seemingly embarrassed by the compliment. Just doing what anyone would do. No, Abigail replied firmly. Not everyone would. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm. Abigail would rise before dawn, prepare breakfast for her children and Adam, then walk to the laundry where she would spend the day washing, ironing, and folding the town's linens and clothing. The work was hard, but Mrs. Russell was fair, and Abigail found satisfaction in earning her own way. Thomas and Sarah thrived under Matthew's care. The boy was patient and kind, teaching Thomas about horses and letting Sarah help with simple tasks around the stable. When Adam wasn't busy with blacksmithing, he would often spend time with the children as well, showing Thomas how to brush the horses or lifting Sarah onto his shoulders so she could see the birds' nests in the rafters. Each evening, Abigail would return to the cabin to find it warm, the fire stoked, and sometimes a rabbit or trout that Adam had caught waiting to be prepared for supper. She would cook for all of them herself, the children, Adam and Matthew, and they would eat together in the cabin, the men regaling the children with stories of the day's happenings in town. As November deepened, the days grew shorter and colder. The first snow fell, dusting Downieville in white and bringing a hush to the normally bustling town. Abigail worried about the coming winter, but each time she tried to broach the subject of finding more permanent accommodations, Adam would change the subject or assure her that they were welcome to stay. One evening, as they sat by the fire after the children had gone to sleep, Adam seemed unusually quiet. Finally, he cleared his throat. Abigail, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. Her heart sank. Was he finally going to ask them to leave? Yes? Winter in the mountains is harsh. The snow can pile up 6 feet deep, and sometimes the roads are impassable for weeks. He paused, staring into the fire. What I'm trying to say is, I think you and the children should stay here through the winter. The cabin is small, but it's sturdy and warm. Relief flooded through her. That's very generous, Adam, but I can't impose on you for months. Surely there must be other accommodations in town by now. There aren't, he said firmly, and it's no imposition. In fact, he hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. In fact, I've grown accustomed to having you all around. The stable hasn't felt so much like a home since my father was alive. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Abigail wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. Adam had become important to her more than just a benefactor or a friend. the way her heart quickened when he smiled at her, the way she found herself looking forward to their evening conversations. These were feelings she hadn't experienced since the early days with Michael. "We enjoy being here too," she said finally, her voice soft. "The children adore you and Matthew. And you?" The question was quiet, almost hesitant. Abigail met his gaze, seeing vulnerability there she hadn't noticed before. "I have come to care for you a great deal, Adam." He reached across the table and tentatively took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from work, but his touch was gentle. "I never expected to find someone like you, Abigail. When my Eliza died, birthing our stillborn son 10 years ago, I thought that part of my life was over." Abigail squeezed his hand. "I felt the same after Michael. The thought of opening my heart again seemed impossible. And now," his blue eyes searched hers, "now I find myself thinking of possibilities I thought were lost to me." Adam smiled, that transformative smile that warmed her from within. "Then we'll take it one day at a time. No rush, no pressure, just us finding our way together." Winter descended on Downieville with a fury that justified Adam's concerns. The snow came in great sweeping curtains, piling high against buildings and making the streets nearly impassable. The laundry business slowed as fewer travelers came through town, but Mrs. Russell kept Abigail on, teaching her to make soap and mend finer garments when washing was scarce. Christmas approached, and despite their modest circumstances, Abigail was determined to make it special for the children. She secretly sewed a rag doll for Sarah from scraps Mrs. Russell had given her, and whittled a small wooden horse for Thomas with a knife Adam had lent her. Adam, too, seemed to be working on secret projects. He spent long evenings in the stable after the children were asleep, the sound of his hammer occasionally drifting through the night air. On Christmas Eve, after the children had hung their stockings from the mantel, another of Adam's creations, installed just days before, he asked Abigail to join him outside. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant above them. Adam led her to a spot behind the stable where a large object stood covered with a blanket. "I wanted to give you your gift privately," he explained, suddenly looking nervous. "It's not much, but—" He pulled away the blanket to reveal a rocking chair, beautifully crafted from pine, with intricate carvings along the arms and back. Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Adam, it's beautiful." "I noticed you didn't have a comfortable place to sit in the evenings," he said, running his hand along the smoothly polished arm. "I thought maybe when the children are asleep, you might like to sit by the fire and read or sew." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the chair itself, but the consideration of how she spent her evenings touched her deeply. "No one has ever made something so beautiful for me," she whispered. Adam stepped closer, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "You deserve beautiful things, Abigail." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Abigail felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by an invisible force. Adam hesitantly raised his hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he brushed away a tear with his thumb. "May I kiss you?" he whispered. In answer, Abigail closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his, in a kiss that started softly but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and newfound hope poured into the connection. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, and she felt as though she had finally found her way home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Abigail O'Connor. I think I have been since the day you walked into my stable." "And I with you, Adam Everett," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "You gave us shelter when we had nowhere to go. But you've given me so much more than that. You've given me hope again." They stood there in the snowy night, the rocking chair a testament to Adam's devotion, and made plans for a future neither had dared to imagine just months before. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the sunlight glinting off the snow-covered landscape. Thomas and Sarah woke early, their excitement palpable as they discovered their filled stockings and the special gifts Abigail had made. But the greatest gift came when Adam joined them for breakfast, bringing with him presents for the children, a small wooden sword for Thomas, and a miniature rocking chair for Sarah's new doll, both clearly crafted with the same care as Abigail's chair. As they sat together enjoying their meal, Adam cleared his throat. "I have something I'd like to discuss with all of you." The children looked up from their new toys, curious. "Thomas, Sarah, I've grown very fond of you both, and of your mother," Adam began, his eyes meeting Abigail's briefly. "I'd like to ask your permission to court your mother properly, with the intention of asking her to be my wife someday, if she'll have me." Thomas's eyes widened. "Would you be our new pa?" Adam nodded solemnly. "I would, if your mother agrees, and if you both would like that." Sarah clambered down from her chair and toddled over to Adam, raising her arms to be lifted. Once settled on his lap, she patted his bearded cheek. "I like you," she declared simply. Thomas looked thoughtful. "Can I still help with the horses?" Adam chuckled. "Of course. In fact, I was thinking that when you're a bit older, you might want to learn blacksmithing too." That sealed the deal for Thomas, who nodded enthusiastically. All eyes turned to Abigail, who found herself overwhelmed with emotion. "I would be honored to accept your courtship, Adam," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. Adam's smile was radiant. "I've never been a wealthy man, Abigail, but I promise to provide for you and the children. My house at the edge of town has been sitting empty since my father died. I couldn't bear to live there alone, but with a family, well, it could be a home again." "You have a house?" Abigail asked, surprised. "It's nothing grand, 4 rooms and a kitchen, with a proper garden plot out back. But it's sound, and there's plenty of room for all of us, including Matthew, if he wants to join us. I've been working on repairs these past weeks, getting it ready, just in case." The revelation that Adam had been preparing for this possibility all along touched Abigail deeply. He hadn't just offered them temporary shelter. He had been building toward a future together. The courtship that followed was brief but proper. Adam was a gentleman in every sense, mindful of Abigail's reputation in the small town. They attended church together on Sundays, took walks when weather permitted, and spent evenings in conversation after the children were asleep. By spring, when the snow began to melt and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, Adam formally proposed, presenting Abigail with a simple gold band he had crafted himself. "It's not fancy," he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger, "but it's made with all the love in my heart." "It's perfect," Abigail assured him, admiring how the gold caught the light. "Just like you." They were married in the small church in Downieville on a bright May morning in 1858, just 6 months after Abigail had arrived in town, desperate and alone. Thomas stood proudly at Adam's side, while Sarah scattered wildflower petals along the aisle. Matthew, now part of their unconventional family, gave Abigail away. The townspeople turned out in force for the ceremony, Mrs. Russell dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, the mercantile owner and his wife beaming from the front pew, miners and shopkeepers filling the small church to capacity. In the short time she had been in Downieville, Abigail had earned the respect of its citizens through her hard work and gentle manner. After the ceremony, they moved into Adam's house, which he had indeed prepared meticulously for their arrival. The rooms were freshly painted, the floors scrubbed, and new curtains hung at the windows. In the master bedroom, Abigail's rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. Life settled into a new rhythm. Abigail continued working for Mrs. Russell, though now only 3 days a week. The rest of her time was spent tending their home and garden, teaching Thomas his letters, and enjoying the simple pleasure of being part of a loving family again. Adam's blacksmithing business flourished as the town grew. He took on Matthew as a formal apprentice, teaching the boy the trade, while Thomas observed eagerly, counting the days until he too could learn to shape metal with fire and hammer. In the summer of 1859, Abigail gave birth to a son they named James, a strong, healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. The family celebrated his arrival with a sense of wonder at how much their lives had changed in less than 2 years. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Adam with James sleeping on his chest and Abigail in her rocking chair with Sarah on her lap, Thomas playing with his wooden sword in the yard, Adam turned to his wife. "Do you remember that day you came to the stable, looking for shelter?" Abigail smiled at the memory. "How could I forget? I was terrified, desperate at the end of my rope. I told you I had room and more heart than land, Adam recalled, his voice soft. But the truth is, my heart was nearly as empty as that cabin until you and the children filled it. And now? Abigail asked, reaching over to take his hand. Adam looked at their intertwined fingers, then at the sleeping baby on his chest, at Sarah singing softly to her doll, at Thomas now climbing the old apple tree in the yard. Now, my heart is so full it feels like it might burst sometimes, he admitted. I never thought I'd have this again, a family, a purpose beyond just getting through each day. Neither did I, Abigail confessed. After Michael died, I couldn't see a future. I was just trying to survive. And look at us now. Adam squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes the best journeys are the ones we never planned to take. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Abigail reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment, the desperate journey to Downieville, the kindness of a stranger who became her husband, the transformation of a shelter into a home. I love you, Adam Everett, she said softly, with all that I am. And I love you, Abigail Everett, he replied, the name still new and wonderful on his lips, for giving me a second chance at happiness. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and flourish. Thomas eventually became Adam's apprentice and later his partner in the blacksmith shop. Sarah, with her mother's gentle spirit and her father's determination, became the town's school teacher. James grew into a strong young man who took to ranching, eventually purchasing land adjacent to their property. The cabin behind the stable remained standing, occasionally housing travelers in need or serving as a quiet retreat when Adam needed solitude for special projects. It stood as a reminder of beginnings, of kindness offered and received, of how a simple offer of shelter had led to a lifetime of love. And on cool evenings when the work was done and the younger children were asleep, Adam and Abigail would often sit together on the porch, her in the rocking chair that had been his first gift to her, him on the steps at her feet, their hands intertwined as they watched the stars emerge above the mountains of Downieville. In those moments, they would sometimes speak of that first day, of the dust-covered woman and her children who had appeared in the stable doorway, of the blacksmith with the missing fingers and the cabin to spare. And they would marvel at how the simplest acts of kindness could change the course of lives forever, how shelter offered in a moment of need could become a home built on love that would stand for generations to come.